Hello everyone and welcome to the panel on rethinking local green policies with DADA and with TESEV, with the Izmir Institute of Technology and with the Turkish Economic and Social Studies Foundation. We are organizing this session. Sorry, we have something. Hopefully now you can only hear my voice. In order to empower local policies, green policies. I'm sorry, we lost the voice of the speaker. Today we are talking about rethinking and the green policies, and also we are trying to do this with basing our opinions on the data that we collected. I will now give the floor to Ms. Nuray and Ms. Koray. And Mr. Koray is an associate professor from Izmir Institute of Technology in city and regional planning. So we are trying to tackle some issues, and we are trying to get onto our agencies the green policies, and carbon emission is a very important issue here, and also transportation is one of the most important effects and the factors in carbon emissions, especially in big cities. And smart transportation became one of the subjects of our agendas recently, and we are trying to diminish the carbon emissions and also minimizing the waiting periods. And there are different for example, different modes of transportation, and we are trying to increase the support between different modes of transportation, make them safer, and thus making the cities more livable and safer. So this whole process is actually, with the help of the communication technologies, we are trying to move towards a smarter way to mobilize people. And of course, there are problems in every city, and green policies are more critical in big cities, and technologies alone themselves cannot really solve the chronic problems, especially such as traffic congestion and traffic jams or air pollution. You cannot just turn your cars and vehicles green and solve all of these problems, because it definitely will be insufficient. So there should be some smart ways to tackle these problems, where we focus on the problems of the cities. A big portion of the energy is consumed by cities, so some technologies should be enabled and used in order to diminish the negative effects in terms of pollution and traffic congestion. So we can see within different groups there are different solutions. For example, when you look at autonomous cars, when you look at the example of Japan, because of the older generation that is very prominent in Japan, there might be some smart solutions for these people, but of course for younger people, especially the younger generation, as the students, there are some other problems arising, and the automation is required in order to solve their problems when they are commuting to work or when they are commuting to school. So we will today, I believe, mainly look at some of the technologies that arise to tackle these problems that I mentioned, and green policies, what kind of space these problems and these technologies take up inside of green policies, and how can we integrate green policies into other policies. So first of all, if you want, I want to take a look at the first question that we have. Dear Matteo, can you please turn your camera on? Can I do the first round, please, if you allow me? Now, I would like to talk about our participants, Colombia, Australia, and here from Turkey. We wanted to get some experience from our participants here. And from Colombia, we have Christian Mateo Alfonso, and from Izmir Metropolitan Municipality, we have Özlem Erten from Izmir Metropolitan Municipality, in the Director of Cycling, Pedestrian Access and Transportation Planning. And first of all, I would like to give the floor to these three speakers, and we will answer some questions. And then Mr. Haluk Gerçek, local team leader for the Istanbul SUMP, will be talking as an evaluation, and then at the end we will have a Q&A session. Now the first question is for Matteo. Do you think policy depending on data, how can you give us an example regarding how it made your life better in the municipality that you're working at?
It hears loud.
Yes, do you need me to repeat the question? Yes.
Yes. My opinion about that. Yes? Right?
Yes.
The data today, nice to meet you. The data is today most important asset. Electronic devices, social networks, web pages, smart payment cards in traffic and transit here in Manizales, and many other sources generate data that can help cities to evaluate and manage public policies on various issues. Mobility especially has benefited from this large amount of data science. In the past, they were taken statically, allowing decisions to be made from theoretical based models. Currently, the models and indicators can have a data-based approach, allowing their constant monitoring. For example, evaluating the modal split on strategic corridors based on automated vehicles counts, and thus evaluating how through the day it is modified, paying special attention to active modes of transport or micromobility. Likewise, certain policies are identified to promote the modal shift towards sustainable mode of transport. Another example is the management of transit payment from smart cards. Linked to the constant management of your data can generate indicators for the improvement and management of public transport. The data is something very important than we taking of decision is a big help. From the Mobility Management Center that is currently being structured and will be implemented from the next year here in Manizales, traffic in real time to optimize traffic flow and reduce emissions. Fleet management system for optimization in the provision of public transport service, use of trips from the origin to destination, matrix for the planning and justification of infrastructure, focus on the most sustainable modes. Real-time visualization of variables for citizens around the exposure of pollutants, travel times, travel costs, caloric expenditure on trips made in active modes, among others.
Teşekkür ediyorum Mateo'ya.
Thank you, Mateo. Now we are moving to Izmir and Özlem Taşkın Erten from the Izmir Metropolitan Municipality. She is the Director of Cycling, Pedestrian Access and Transportation Planning. I want to ask you, when you talk about the smart mobilization policies, how these policies feed into your green policies in Izmir. Can you tell us? Yes, we will be talking about the smart mobility and sustainable transportation. I will be talking about these things today. And now when you look at the Izmir Metropolitan Municipality, the smart mobility policies combine their policies with green policies. First of all, we want to talk about the smart mobility policy. It is actually an action plan towards sustainable mobility and smart mobility. And within this action plan, until 2050, Europe is targeted to become an energy neutral city, place in general. And this is very important for us because when you look at the European smart movement or mobility program, this strategy and action plans, they are actually giving us examples on how they can tackle these problems we experience in terms of climate change, in floods, in natural disasters, and maybe within the last 2 years we have been experiencing a lot of different problems along with COVID-19, and we are actually looking at the transportation sector in general and how we can tackle these types of disasters and important crisis moments such as the pandemic. So we are trying to create a transportation system that is accessible and affordable for everyone. Just like Mr. Koray mentioned in the beginning, we are trying to diminish the carbon emissions, first of all, and there's an action plan for that, of course, in Europe. But when we look at Izmir Metropolitan Municipality, there are some claims, of course, zero emission transportation system, creating such a system, or giving up carbon based fuels and providing a good management of traffic, maybe zero emission airports. These are all very good targets and objectives, and not only in the city centers but outside the cities, of course, turning transportation into a greener area, again in logistics within the cities, or smart mobility, and how we can use artificial intelligence and smart solutions to enable smart mobility. And green infrastructure policies, of course, these are all feeding into each other, and we are trying to achieve all of these along with affordable and safe transportation system for everybody. These are these can be classified as the main actions and main objectives of this action plan. So within European Union, there is this strategy and action plan that leads into digitalization of transportation systems, and again making transportation faster, safer, and affordable for everyone. Now, when we look at the smart mobility policies, our Izmir Metropolitan Municipality actually has the basically same objectives. And I want to tell you how we are carrying the same concerns and same objective. First of all, we have an urban transformation network, and climate crisis and some inequalities in income, for example. There are so many different issues that is within this framework. So with the help of some associations, we signed the protocol in Izmir Metropolitan Municipality. We started to work on developing a sustainable transportation network. And the second issue is that sustainable energy action plan for Izmir. This is another action plan that we developed in our metropolitan municipality. Until 2030, we have some objectives that we want to achieve. And when we look at these objectives, Metropolitan Municipality of Izmir actually realized 2 of their action plans, and we actually created a sustainable transportation network. And you can see that from our sites on Izmir Metropolitan Municipality's websites. We have a green life strategy, and it is collected under 4 titles. So one of them is to preserve the nature, of course, within the cities. There are, of course, so many problems with urbanification in the city, and which is ruining actually the green areas, and we are trying to tackle that problem. And the second title is, of course, the green transportation. And another principle that we have is to connect the urban areas to the outside skirts of the city. And the other objective or title I might list here is to not only connect the urban areas with the rural areas, but also create a culture between these areas. So we are trying to create a unity between the city center, and the rural areas as well. So in the General Assembly of our strategy plan and action plan committees, we actually realized this project. I'm sorry, I'm just listing the projects for them to be an example. Maybe I'm coming after Mr. Haluk here to talk about these experiences and projects, but this green energy plan and sustainable urban network objectives that we have, they are actually only for making the cities greener and safer for everyone. And this planning that we had, we started in 2015, and our objectives are required to be met in 2030, until 2030. We try to look at the needs, transportation needs of the citizens and people from different neighborhoods, especially in the business centers around the city, for example. We wanted to look at the commute and the modes of transportation of people, and we evaluated these needs and requirements, and we created a railroad system that would definitely meet the requirements of people, especially that are commuting to work. And we are collecting the results and collecting the fruits of these projects that we have done recently. There is another issue that we want to focus on, which is reducing the need for motored vehicles in the city. And we are doing this by improving our infrastructure for other modes of transportation, such as cycling, that don't require any motored vehicles. We have a lot of action plans regarding cyclists and the pedestrians and the motorists as well. So what we want to do is that we want to achieve, of course, these objectives of the action plans. I want to give two other examples to the action plans and the works that we have realized. One of them was about solid waste management and also combining them with smart mobility plans. And also another work we have done was towards the logistics aspect of transportation. And the next project for us is the smart, sustainable mobility plan. And we are trying to achieve an innovative solution that we can realize with the use of real data coming from the field. And with a smart data system, we are trying to meet the people with a green transportation mode. And I wanted to just tell you about the Izmir Metropolitan Municipality's action plan and projects that have been done. We are still continuing, but these are some of the ones that we have completed. Thank you very much. I can see that you have a very wide scope of green policies and projects, and I believe smart mobilization is at the heart of your plans. Yes, there are a lot of things that we had to talk about, so as there is limited time, I had to be a little bit quick about talking about our projects. Okay, thank you very much.
Our third speaker came from a different background. Since now we had similar profiles. Now we have an R&D, and we have a speaker from Austria Technology University who is researching the digital technologies. So Johannes Müller will be talking to us from a different perspective, and we are asking him about the Vienna municipality, about the usage of the data. What kind of collaboration do they have with the university? Merhaba.
My name is Dr. Johannes Müller. I'm with the AIT Austrian Institute of Technology. I'm speaking here as a representative of academia. Maybe I first explain what AIT is. It's basically not a university, it's a research institution, and we have the purpose that we bring the theory from the lab to practice. So we are very often working on the application. I'm with the unit of the digital resilient cities, meaning we have a lot of contact with the cities and we support them in many projects. AIT's structure is that we work in projects, meaning we are half funded by the public, but we also have to look for our own research projects. And this is also how we cooperate with cities. I mean, there is the city of Vienna because we are based in Vienna, but there are also other cities, for example, smaller towns, which have completely different questions than a million city like Vienna. But we're also working in other countries, not only Europe. It can be on the European Union. It can be, for example, in Tbilisi in Georgia. We have a project and supported them. And then we were funded by other partners like the Asian Development Bank. So when we talk about exchange or cooperation with municipalities or the cities, we usually do that in forms of project. Sometimes we also get the tender, or the city makes the tender by itself, but it's rarely happening, or sometimes it happens, but it must be a very specific question. For example, a city wants to know what has this policy implementation as an effect on traffic, for example. For example, what Paris and London is supposed to do to have a 30 kilometers per hour limit in most parts of the city. That could be also a question that the city of Vienna has. I think it has, but not publicly formulated. So that could be a typical question, how they address us and other partners, and then we could cooperate and give them some responses. How we usually cooperate with the cities and municipalities is that we see the cities as the policy partners or the policy makers. They are not the decision makers, that they're very close to them because the decision makers are the politicians, the city council. The city itself, it's mostly some administrative work, and they know a bit the direction, and the direction depends a bit on the political power, the people that are in power, and they give a bit the direction. So they're not completely free from any political power. How do we do this collaboration? As I said, we have them as policy supporters, or also they bring often some ideas for policies, as Matteo has already mentioned. So they usually have a list and a set of policies, what they could do and what they would like to do. And then it's about us to support them in the decision-making process. So what could be the good solution, or what has it for an impact if you would apply that? So that's where we try to give them support, meaning we would have the kind of knowledge and kind of the traffic models. They have the ideas and also the knowledge about what is feasible, what is realizable in the next months and years. And this is how we actually have them very likely as partners. Often the cooperation is not as a partner in a project, but also just as a supporter. So they support us because it's also very important to have the implementation. As I said, we are very focused on the application. So we are not studying urban design in its theory. That's rather what universities would do. We are, let's say, we are more developing the tool and try to make it applicable for planners and also to apply it in the decision-making process. And the city is then a wonderful partner, not as a data supplier, but as an implementation support. So they could say, I do have this district and in this area where we try to figure out what we can change because it's up for a renovation, rebuilding process. What can we do better? Should we still have the parking lots? Should we build more greenery? Where should we build it? Two projects that I want to mention that we do at the moment. One is an Horizon 2020 project, so it's funded by the European Commission in the framework of the Horizon 2020. The new framework is the Horizon Europe framework. It's called Levitate, and in Levitate we have a bunch of partners who are caring about impacts of modern traffic forms and new traffic policy interventions. One of them is road use pricing, meaning the tolls in the road, for example, the congestion toll like in London. And the other one is the introduction of autonomous shuttles, meaning the autonomous vehicles that are maybe coming in 10 years, maybe in 20, we don't know. And the city of Vienna is one of their partners in the project, and they are basically there supporting us in figuring out what are good policy interventions, because we do have the traffic simulation on a mesoscopic level, meaning we know where people are basically traveling at the moment. It's calibrated with the current data set. But what happens now if we do have a new mode of transport? What happens if we have the introduction of a city toll? And they helped us to decide what are good policy interventions to simulate. And one of them was, for example, last mile shuttles. That means that we try to implement the autonomous vehicles. In theory, it's still not, they're not driving at the moment. In theory, for the rather peripheral areas, because what happens if you just introduce it, people will go to the city center with these shuttles, or also car sharing. It's very related to that you have the service and it operates then on points where there's actually good support and provision of public transport already, and it just induces more traffic. So the city said it's good if you just limit it to the outbound area, so where the last underground station is, for example, and what would happen if we now connect it and they just operate in the cells at the end and they don't do these cross city traffic. So this is one example how we collaborate. Another one is Tune Our Block. It's a current project just started in May of this year. It's about super blocks. So you may have heard of this idea, this concept. It derives in the city of Barcelona, because they have this typical grid structure, which is usually rarely seen in European cities. It's more in the American towns. But Barcelona has these grid structures, and their idea was to kind of form a super block, meaning that you put together several blocks and you just remove the traffic on some streets in between, meaning the block, which is usually 300 meters, becomes now a super block with a kind of less than 1 kilometer, still a walkable neighborhood, but it kind of forms an own entity, and you don't have the through traffic, which is usually not supporting the livability. And in this project, we try to bring this concept to the other European cities. We have living labs that we try in Berlin and Vienna. And there, the city of Vienna is a wonderful supporter in the implementation for these super blocks, because if you want to do this applied research, you need partners that you can work together with, and that can actually, where you can actually get all the support from the city when you want to apply something. For example, in temporal living labs, where we close the street and then ask pedestrians and other residents, what do they think about this idea, and so on. Without the city as a partner, it's much more difficult, because you usually you cannot promise anything in the project. This is one thing. So also from the funding agencies, it's very nice when the city is on board, because it shows that it has a huge impact on the current topics or the issues that the city has. And it means also that you have the support from the policy makers. Beside that, maybe just mention when it's about data. I mean, cities are not usually the biggest data suppliers. Sometimes they are. For example, in Vienna, they have a lot of public housing, so they can support us with quite exact data about that, and it helps us to perform our energy models in a better way.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum Johannes, sana da.
Thank you very much, Johannes, for your talk. And from the experience that you shared with us, I can see that we have different models, different tools. I can see that you collaborate with city councils, with academia. It's quite a strong collaboration. You develop different models, and you are working with the policymakers in order to support you for the opinions, for the concepts that you are developing. And I think that everything is quite mutually, and you have a mutual framework, and you are quite successful. Thank you so much. So we are pretty much done with our first session, first round, let's say. We talked about the mobility in Izmir, and also we talked about academia and research and different methodologies and different city partners in Vienna. We talked about those topics. And for the second round, I have Koray in here. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about the smart mobility policies. Again, I want you guys to talk in the same order. Matteo, I would like to start with you. about the integration. You already talked about the integration of the green policies, but now I want you to explain us the smart mobility policies that are implemented by you. And while you are collecting the data in real time, how do you manage to do that? Because I know that it is very challenging. What are the challenges that you are facing? And while you are collecting data in the city, how are you dealing with the integration? And what are the opportunities that you find in here actually?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Elbette. Akıllı hareketlilik politikalarınız neler?
What are your smart mobility policies and what are the challenges that you are facing while you are collecting data? Bunu yaparken zorluklar ve imkanlar nelerdir? Her şeyden önce buradaki imkanlara odaklanmak istiyorum. Hareketlilik konusunda ve akıllı cihazlar konusundaki tüzük koyuculara birazcık odaklanmak istiyorum. Verilerin düzenli toplanması, belirli indikatörlerin, özellikle trafikle alakalı indikatörlerin gözetlenmesine yol açıyor. Benzer şekilde yeni yönetim şekillerinin, yeni yönetişim modellerinin keşfedilmesini sağlıyor yapay zekaya dayalı olarak. Deep learning, derin öğrenme modellerinin yetenekle birlikte tamamlanmış bu ek modellerin teorilerle birlikte keşfedilmesini sağlıyor. Sınırlandırmalar konusunda şunu görüyoruz, verilerin sürekli toplanması hem tesisat hem ekipman açısından şehir kapsamında bir takım sorunlara yol açıyor bu cihazlarla ilgili olarak. Bu büyük ölçekli verilerin yönetimiyle birlikte veri depolama sorunu da ortaya çıkıyor. Burada bu sorunun, bu kapasite sorununun profesyoneller tarafından ele alınması gerekiyor. Hareketlilik yönetiminin ele alınması çok önemli. Hali hazırda geniş sayıda imkanlara ve sınırlandırılmalara ve zorluklara cevap vermek zorunda kaldık. Satışlar arttıkça bu konuda önemli kararlar vermek özellikle şehir adına çok zorlaşıyor. Thank you very much for those of you who are not knowing Mateo. He's from South America, and I want to say that there are policies and some issues. Can you talk us, Mateo? Can you walk us through a little bit through the challenges and policies related to this topic? O kısmı.
Peki. I would like to introduce my question directly to you in English. Could you please provide a background information about Manizales, because which is very, far away from Turkey. So, what are the problems in transportation in your city? So, how can you cope with problems by using smart mobility solutions?
Actually, here we are executing, right, with the Minister of TICS Minister of Telecommunication here in Colombia, they give us like $1 million for a structure, that infrastructure that permits, that allows collect that information. Manizales is implemented the system integrated of transport, right? With that transport, we will can pay via cards for public transport. Manizales now is implemented a lot, but with the Minister of Transportation here in Colombia. We are working with that minister.
Okay. Thank you, Mateo. Şimdi ikinci
Now we have the second round, and I want Özlem from Izmir to talk.
We talk about some of the bases for green policies and the action plans and preparations for those action plans that laid the infrastructure for green policies. What world cities have you interacted with to create these action plans? So smart policies, in order to create smart policies, it is very important for us that we are in interaction with some other cities around the world who have dealt with these types of smart solutions. So we are in this stage. Our situation is that especially we want to take part in European Union projects, and we actually receive they actually include us in Horizon projects and European Union projects. We have the agreement for mayors, for example. Our objective in that as well is to decrease carbon emissions by 60%. So we are in interaction with other cities, especially from Europe, that have done this or is a part of this. I want to talk to you about a project about innovative natural policies and solutions and transferring those into the urban areas, into cities. And we are kind of an observer or monitoring agency there. So it is about creating, especially in the Kozak Highland, in the northern part of Izmir, a more natural solution to our urban problems. There is a touristic cycling road project, and Turkey is also included in that. It is an international project. This project was really beneficial for us because we have had the opportunity to work with other cities from around the world who have been included in this project, so that we can learn from their policies for sustainable projects and sustainable green policy objectives. So we are coming together with cities around the world. That's how I can answer your question. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And I want to add this. So when we were doing the master plan for the transportation and also sustainable logistic plan, we are doing the benchmarking for these processes. And Barcelona, some cities from Germany, for example, are working on promoting sustainable transportation, and we get some of the good practices from these cities, especially on a scale of European cities. And when we are doing the action plans for sustainable transportation, and so we added a criteria that they needed to do a good for example, such as the example of Munich or Barcelona or Vienna. They are actually good examples of SUMPs. So if there is any institution, a company, or anything like that, we are planning on communicating with them and learn from their examples. Because when you are doing an action plan, you have to be in there, you have to be in the field, and you have to touch elbows with the other players in the field. So it is not just an example from Turkey, or it's not a closed box, it's an open area. We have to be in interaction with other cities from around the world, and good practices from European cities and all around the world. Actually, we have to learn how they work on the data, how they store the data. We need to learn these, and it is actually now even better because with the network we can actually communicate through online platforms, so it's even better to be in communication with them. You talked about Vienna a little bit, and I want to talk to Johannes again.
With sustainable model solutions for green cities.
Yeah, thanks for this question. Well, I can give you the perspective of me as a researcher. Research is always happy if they receive data, and even better if the data are publicly available. The city of Zurich, for example, or also Hamburg and Berlin, have made some effort in the last years, where they put a lot of data on their on their platform, which is really helpful if you do not receive, for example, mobility or population data on an image, but really the geodata behind. So that would be my first point that I mentioned, to have an ecosystem. That means it's kind of interwoven. You would have links between people that use the data and other people that benefit from it. Often I think cities are maybe still in the mood that they think their data is a treasure, and it is. But nonetheless, if you hide your treasure, it's a bit like you have an artifact and you don't put it in a museum, but you just leave it in the basement so nobody can work with it. There have been progress in many cities, I think. Very popular is one method that I think is very supportive for that. These are the hackathons. Hackathons are, it's not only about coding. It's basically that you take a short time to work on a challenge that a city has, and you provide some data as a city or as other supporters, and then you let people with their skills work on the data, meaning you enrich the data and you get the true knowledge, you get the right information out of that. So this is something I think is a good way to test. I think many cities, also Vienna, is always doing this, because data alone are not the source of knowledge. You need to have people that know how to work with it. And this can be volunteers, that can be academia, that can be industry partners, for example. One thing that I think is also important to consider in the terms of data ecosystem, data are often considered as kind of abstract thing. Also, when you think of smart city, you think of a lot of devices that measure anything, that sense how many people, how much pollution is going on in which city, in which part of the city, and so on. So you often have the image that it's a very technical term, but it's not. I think data is basically just a measurement, and you can measure a lot of things. And it's important that you measure the right things, and that you also think of data sources that you might have not considered as data sources. For example, humans, citizens. Citizens are also a kind of data source. And not only that you see citizens as sensors, this is also a term that has been used in the last years, meaning, for example, when you have pedestrian flows, you know where people move and so on, but that you also ask them for their opinions, because if you have a planning site, a planning project, they are the one that can give feedback to you. And if you think of any good app that you have, it's usually gone through the stage of a user user participation. So users have tested the app, and then it will be adapted to the changes that the users made. And in the same way, you have to think of the city. You should not think of that as if you want to have a place that is about to be rebuilt, that you just hire some architects and they will just place a wonderful building that will appear in the next architecture magazine. It's also that people use that, and not only people, also the economy, the businesses need to use it in a way. So you have a lot of stakeholders that you can integrate and use as a data source. In this way, it's always important also for us that we communicate the knowledge that we have gained in our models, and also communicate it and feed it back to citizens, because there are two problems when you work with people. It's often that they have a kind of this NIMBY attitude. That means not in my backyard. That means I want to have a wonderful city, but if it's about a highway, if it's about a bus line, not in front of my house, because that brings all the noise and you always see the disadvantages. Meaning, what we can do as researchers, we can support and supply all the impacts that interventions might have. For example, also in the positive way, that if you have trees and you want to plant them, that you tell them actually it's good for your for the urban heat, it's good for the heat in the city and the thermal comfort. On the other side, if you ask people, you might get a very noisy feedback, like you get answers that you don't really know how to work on. And that means you have to know you have to have the right tools to get the information that are really important for you. Because sometimes you get, for example, people will tell you, I want to have my parking lot in front of my house. You as an expert, you know, well, we cannot afford, if we want to go to zero emissions mobility in some years, that everyone has a car. So you have to know what is the actual need behind this topic that has been addressed. And it might be that the person just wished to have a good accessibility to its flat and the city, but it might not be necessary to have a parking lot. So that are the two things that are very important in regards of ecosystem communication, and also to have this flow of data.
Thank you. Çok teşekkürler.
Thank you very much. And now I'm giving the floor to Professor Dr. Haluk Gerçek. He is a local team leader for the Istanbul SUMP. He is one of the most valuable and esteemed people in this area in Turkey. So I'm looking forward to his evaluations. Thank you very much, Koray. My name is Haluk Gerçek. I'm from Istanbul Technical University faculty member for many years, and I'm retired from that position. Now I'm the local team leader for the Istanbul SUMP since last September, and also the urban, yes, I'm the local team leader, like I mentioned. And within the next 1.5 months from now, we will be finishing up the first SUMP plan. And another very important aspect of our SUMP is that it is one of the biggest in terms of the population size of a city, because Istanbul's population is about 16 million. So in terms of the size, it is very important. It is the first city that will do such a big sized SUMP or SUMP. In September 2019, when we started SUMP, there was no COVID or no pandemic, but after that the pandemic started. So one of the most important factors of SUMP was kind of it took a hit because there was no participation. Of course, the physical participation was hindered a little bit. So we had to do some surveys and some meetings, some expert meetings on the online platform. So this became a first in the literature as the first SUMP that was carried out during the pandemic. And today, especially some of the information that came from Izmir, I want to say that I am really pleased to hear about all those projects and plans, action plans that you talked about Izmir Metropolitan Municipality. And I had the opportunity to monitor and see some of the action plans and programs there. And smart cities and the planning that goes behind it is very difficult, especially in these times. The cities are growing in a very fast-paced manner, and 7 billion people on world, and we are expecting by 2030 maybe 70% of the world population is to be expected to live in the cities. So the performance indicators or the data that we have will be crucial to managing the cities and the load that is on the transportation system. So we have to have a very wide scope of planning and innovative solutions that will be required in the future. And also in this regard, I have to say that this data and smart technologies and applications, they have been used in different areas throughout the years, in recent years mostly, and they are used in disaster management and in agriculture, in public spaces, regarding safety, for example. It is a wide range of areas where we can use smart solutions and data to, for example, when we look at the big data, use of the big data is, especially in terms of transportation, is very important for us. Why so? Because when you look at the traditional data collecting methods, they are actually not very effective and they are expensive. So with different solutions, different sources, for example, we have smart cards and some mobile phones and GPSs, geographical data from those types of applications. We have smart and open source for information. So we have billions of data coming in from everywhere, and most of these data needs to be kind of eliminated. Some of them should be eliminated so that we can actually get to the data that we need. So when you use the data to find a solution, you need to use several different algorithms to select out the data that will be beneficial to you. And when you look at the mobile phone data are in the hands of the operators, mobile phone operators, and they don't share these data with the people or with other companies. So you have to actually pay to get them. And so in order to make a plan depending on the data, the open source data and innovative data solutions are definitely important for us. Another topic is that when we look at the smart city technologies in terms of what's happening in Turkey, we have to pay attention to some things. We have to rethink some things. So I want to say a few things about this. When we look at the smart city technologies, there are two different approaches. One of them is technology-based or technology-focused application, and it handles technology as an independent variable. So, and they say that if you don't want to be left behind, you have to use the technology and adapt them, and you have to adapt yourself into the technology. I can go a little bit on detail on that, but later. And the second approach is the social focused approach. So in the first approach, you can see the technology as an independent variable that needs to be used. But we see that a lot of the smart applications for countries, especially for Turkey, they all become kind of a show-off of technology, and unfortunately they are not really used effectively because we are not a country that produces technology in that regard in our country. So we are actually getting these from other countries, and they are all becoming a tool to show off and not use effectively. I can give you an example from the transportation area. For example, you can see the automotive sector. They are always promising us safer, greener solution and autonomous vehicles, for example. But when we look at the reality, these developments can be amazing, but none of them, when you look at the traffic congestion, for example, you cannot change the city's general face with these technologies. When you have to consider the geography of the cities, for example, and they cannot really create a solution to these problems that we have. So when you are getting the technology and using the technology, it is important to know that what we are using it for and what benefits it will bring us. And this should be defined very well. And this brings us to the second approach, which is the socially focused and data-based solutions. And I believe that one is a better approach instead of focusing solely on technology. And with all stakeholders in this field, there should be discussions, especially on the local administration levels, so that we can actually move forward. And it should be also very transparent on the local administration level. And we have to use the technology with an approach based on data in order to improve ourselves in that sense. When we look at the data sharing and smart technologies or smart mobility, let's say, with the we worked with the metropolitan municipality in Istanbul for 2 years, and it is also the case in the private sector, but in the public sector there is a closed structure. You know, they have their own system, they have their own hierarchy in their systems, and even the data shared within these systems and network, it is a very closed box, so you have trouble accessing some of the data. And when you look at smart technologies and data sharing, if you put them in a closed box and closed network, you cannot achieve anything. These units they should be included in a system that is horizontally and vertically connected to all the shareholders so that they can actually share and learn from the data. So within this closed system, it is very difficult for people to share the data. We worked on this as a part of the SUMP, the SUMP that we worked on with the Metropolitan Municipality in Istanbul, and we tried to establish a system where it was very well defined who was responsible for which data to be shared with which units. So within this network, we achieved a better flow of data. And in terms of administration, there is a lot of differences with the European cities or European SUMPs, for example. And I think there's a big question mark in two aspects. And based on my experience on SUMP for 2 years, I want to say that SUMP of every city is different from the other. So you cannot really, of course there are some guidelines and some definitions and some guides that you can follow, some rules, 12 steps or whatever, but when you look at some of the good examples and good applications, implementations from European cities, for example, they may follow the same guidelines, but they are more successful. So you cannot see the same SUMP project in every city. It's not the same for everywhere. So we have to be really careful about that when we are talking about data transfer, and we need to be careful about the know-how, the transfer of know-how, and we need to learn from other cities as well. So there is no template that could go over every city. We need to understand that, but with the good practices in other cities, we can get examples from them. And also about technologies, for smart technologies, there was a book published in 2021, Professor Madrin. A City is Not a Computer was the title of the book, and I actually had the chance to read it. And the smart technologies, it says in the book, that these are fast, efficient, cost efficient, and usually temporary solutions. And mostly they are commercial packages. They come as commercial packages, and this actually disables the local administrations to look into the causes of the real problems, of some of the real problems of cities, for example, the poverty or the inequalities. When the cities, for example, say that they use some smart solutions or smart technologies, these people, the author of this book asks that, who are these people that you are using these technologies for? If they cannot benefit from it, it doesn't mean much that you have these smart technologies. And I believe that in the literature, there is not a clear definition for most of the terminology that we use. In the Sustainable Future documentation from a Norwegian university, there was a literature scan, and it's a really important document about sustainability of the smart technologies and smart cities. Data-based cities or sustainable cities, etc., etc. Some of the terminology that was there, but it was not well defined in the literature according to the authors of the documentation. I just wanted to give you these examples before I finish my speech. Thank you very much, Mr. Haluk. That was really enlightening, and thank you for all of the information you provided us with about.
And we saw that there are a lot of problems that actually we need to fix. So let's continue like this if you want. We have some questions from the listeners. So if you have any questions, please forward them. We have a question. It is forwarded to Johannes, to you, okay? So here comes the question. So the data that you are collecting, which digital tools are you using for analyzing? What kind of algorithms and interfaces are you using for that?
So it's very hard to say we do this algorithm or whatever. I can just talk about, for example, about the mobility, and it really depends what is the question. For example, we have different models, simulation models. We use one framework that is called MATSIM. It's the multi-agent transportation simulation. It's an abbreviation, so it's an open source framework. Other ones would be VSIM, or on a smaller scale, VSUM, which are not open source, and then it's kind of a black box, so you buy the model. This MATSIM model, I can just talk about that because I work with that quite a lot. It's not a specific algorithm. It's more, you have this framework, you have to have an OD matrix, an origin destination matrix. So you need to know what are the activities of people in the city to simulate them as agents and that they walk around the city the whole day, kind of. This is a mesoscopic model, meaning it's a kind of, you don't zoom very much to the space. So it's not so important. We are here in this park and it goes to this bench. It's more, it goes to this neighborhood. And then after that, in the afternoon, the agent moves to this workspace outside of the city, for example. You can have more detailed level, like the micro simulation model. There we use an own framework that we programmed on our own. It's called MPET or Simulate. We usually sell it as Simulate, a very general term. Where we also work with these origin destination matrices, and they can zoom in much more detail. For example, you can have a museum, a space, or let's say an underground station, and you want to simulate what is the capacity of this underground station. So you need to know what are the different levels of the underground station. You need to know how many people are going to the train and are going out, what is the frequency of the train, and so on and so on. And there you also use different theoretical models in the background. In this case, you often use a social force model, which has been developed in the 90s. But all the theoretical models, also for the mesoscopic simulation, they are fed in the simulation frameworks, which we usually work. And maybe, this is just the mobility. We also now try to, not zoom out, but to connect it to the typical planning tools of architects. There we have this huge tool called Rhino with its plugin Grasshopper, which usually does not work with mobility data, but that's one of our approaches to also link these different tools, for example, the origin destination matrix, so that you know where people are moving and how do they use the space. I'm sorry that I cannot give a very precise answer. I mean, for algorithms, there are many, many different ones, but it usually depends on the application case and the question. Also for the traffic model, it depends what is the question that you have, because when you zoom out too much with the simulation, you don't get the answer, so it's too imprecise.
Peki.
Benim bir sorum var.
I have a question, if there are no other questions from the listeners. It's my question is for Matteo and Johannes. As Haluk talked to us about the topics that we need to rethink, the most important thing was the data management, data governance, especially because we are working with municipalities. And this is one of the most common issue. The data can't be shared between the same departments, the different departments of the same institution, and there are different reasons for that. But the most important is related to the open data. At Vienna and Manizales, I saw those kinds of things regarding the shareability, accessibility of the data, and I'm wondering what is your situation, what is your current status about those kinds of manageability, accessibility, shareability of those data.
Yeah, so maybe I can just start. As far as I know, Vienna has not yet this open data strategy. So there's some data available, but for example, but it's not the city of Vienna, it's more the transport provider of the trains. So they have some of their trains, the schedule of the trains as open data. But for example, not the buses. So the buses in the rural area, we have to ask the provider. And yeah, I just can talk from my experience with Zurich because I had the luck to work with one of the, actually from the city administration of Zurich, who was working in our team as our team leader when I was doing my postdoc in Singapore. And there they just changed it to the open data government. And he said from his experience, it was actually the biggest benefit was for the city itself, because exactly of this issue that you mentioned, that you cannot share it within the departments because it's always a legal issue. I also know it from our software. If we have it closed source, so not open source, then it's always a problem because you legally need to have a license for that, and just let it be an open license for no money. Or if you have money, then you need to ensure, is the data deleted, is after the use, and so on and so on. So the legal department asks a lot of questions, meaning open data. So they actually said sometimes to me, if you have your tool open source, it's much easier because we just can use this one license. It's a legal license. And then people could just use it. I mean, it's also good for promoting the own tools, but for sure, the problem is usually that you need a business model. So you are the one that collects the data or that provides a tool. And if you have it open source, then you need a different kind of business model. So you make very standard one is that you provide just some data and then have some data for sale. So you kind of lure the people. It's kind of what many apps do at the moment, that you can have a free download, but if you want to use the real tools, then you have to pay a bit. That's one business model that you can use. Sometimes for cities, I think they don't have to be economically proficient, so they don't have to make money, but it's more that I think what I know from my experience, it's a safety issue. So what kind of data do you share? You just have to think of a mean attack, and they just know where the water system is, and they know all where the water tubes are going in the city. Can it be used for a terror attack or something like this? So these are different questions that you have, where I also don't have an answer. I just yeah, it would be good to have the experience from someone now from the city of Zurich. How is it like after some years? Are there more problems? And I think there are some problems. It's not only easy to handle, and maybe they even go back and close some of the data sources. maybe it's a good strategy to just start with the very nonsensible data, like let it be geofiles and some population data, which are really not sensitive for anything, but can be very beneficial for anyone who works with that.
Batıl Hanım, belki bu konuda bir iki şey ilave edebilirim burada.
Just wanna add something based upon our own experiences to what you just said, Johannes. We have two topics in here. And as you just mentioned, we have confidentiality on one hand, especially when it comes to geodata. Which of them can be shared as open source? Which of them pose a threat for security? And the other topic is the mobility, the mobility data and the smart car data and the privacy topic. Ensuring the safety of the private data and allow the usage of those data only after the anonymity, the confidentiality is actually ensured. We don't need the personal data. We are using the confidential, the anonymous data regarding the activities. So, but when it comes to sharing data inter-institutions, this is a very serious topic. I'm not talking only about the city councils or the municipalities. I'm talking about the central governance, central government and municipalities. I know that there are obstacles, especially because all of you are aware about the political climate here in Turkey. If the central governing mechanism, the central governance and the local governance have different political views, then the central governance doesn't want or might not want to share their own data. So we at Istanbul, we actually live that, we experience that. Those are not very nice examples, but we live with those, and I think that from bottom to top, we need a more shareable policy, a policy in which all the partners can access to those data. We need a better managed governance policy, because the sharing of the data and those processes, without having those processes completed, it's not possible to plan any sustainable smart cities. Indeed, I'm totally with you, and because the data are very different, they can't be compared. Also, this is one of the issues that I encountered. And of course, sometimes the institutions doesn't want to share their data, and the Turkish Statistical Institute sometimes even they don't want to share their own data. So sometimes it's very hard for us, not only due to political reasons, but also due to technical reasons. It's very, very hard for us to find the proper data which are fit to be shared. So this is a very important issue. Thank you very much. Matteo, is there anything that you want to share with us about the sharing of the data? Do you want to share with us anything?
The Ministry of Transportation here in Colombia is implementing intelligent transportation system. This under International Organization for Standardization ISO 14813. Under that the municipalities are involving that services with their own resources and in team with the national government to have integrated system of public transportation. Manizales in transport has aerial cable, bus, public vehicles for people to access that services. It is necessary to have open information. Other services that the Ministry of Transportation here in Colombia is implementing is traveler information, traffic management and operation, vehicle services, freight transport, public transport, emerging services, transport-related payments, road transport-related personal safety. But all this information have to public information to the citizens. That is the message. That information is open for all citizens here in Manizales and especially in Colombia too.
Thank you very much, Matteo. Özlem, do you wanna add anything? I know that Izmir has the same issues with the rest of us. I know that you are facing some challenges. Is there anything that you want to share with us? Maybe you have done something innovative, something different in Izmir. We have an open data platform in our city council, and especially on the transportation side, we are trying to access suddenly in real time the data. We are trying to to collect the data of the real persons, their movements in the traffic. And I think that our target in here, it should be the designing of the decision-making process. We are gathering the data, but for the smart mobility, what are we doing? How should be designed our platform? I think that the innovative solutions should be integrated with the transport master plans. And as Matteo just told us, we need policies to do that. And I think that is very important to be able to design such a process. We have a data processing center working under the Izmir municipality, and we want to develop that department. Thank you very much. This is something very innovative, and there is something a little bit tricky in here, because in order to become innovative you need to collect data, but the collection of the data is also an innovative thing in its own, and we need policies for mobility. I have a question. I have a question for the technical teams. We have just 1 more minute. Do you have any more questions? I also want to add a couple of things. Johannes, I guess that you talked a little bit about the Barcelona super block experience. We talked about the data, we talked about the transport, but we don't talk too much about the relation with the space and place. Maybe this super block experience is kind of internalizing all of those topics that we talked about. That maybe this is something important, is a significant example in order to succeed this. So how are we going to achieve this? I think that the super block example in Barcelona is like a single, like a unique structure, and maybe we can implement also this model for the metropolitan cities such like Istanbul. I think that it will be very enthusiastic to do that. Just a small reminder. And Izmir will start to try this example, but at a smaller scale, of course. Thank you very much. So, okay, we are out of time, but I want to offer my thanks and my respects to everybody, to the participants, and to